Hi everyone, hello, how are you doing? I hope you're doing good. So, welcome to another video of chapter 9, that is control and coordination. Up till now, we were discussing the brain, the central nervous system, under which we discussed the parts of the brain, the cerebrum, the forebrain, under which we studied cerebrum, diencephalon, and olfactory bulb. Then we also studied about the midbrain and hindbrain, parts of hindbrain, that is pons, medulla oblongata, and cerebellum. We have covered all these topics, their structure, their function. Okay. Now we move on to the next part of the central nervous system, which is your spinal cord. Okay, under the spinal cord, we will also study reflex action, and then we will move to the another branch of the nervous system, that is peripheral nervous system. Okay, so let's begin. This is how a spinal cord looks like. Okay, it extends from the brain itself, and when you do a cross section of the spinal cord, it will look like something like this. Okay, so spinal cord will extend from the base of your brain into the vertebral canal. So you have the bony structure, vertebral canal. See, spinal cord and vertebral canal, these are two different things. Okay, the just like you have the skull, and inside the skull you have the brain, which is protected. In similar manner, you have the vertebral column, inside which the spinal cord is there, which is protected. Okay, so vertebral column is the bony structure in which the soft, this tissue of the spinal cord will be there. Yes. So from the base of the brain into the vertebral column formed by the vertebrae. Cross section will show you that it has a central canal. It has a central canal, like you see this canal-like system, canal-like thing, okay, which will run down through the spinal cord. It will have gray matter. It will have white matter, just like the brain. It will have the cerebrospinal fluid also. Remember, you see this blue lining over there. This is nothing but the fluid. Okay. Okay, so similarly, you will have these structures also in the spinal cord. This is how the spinal cord will look like. Okay, let me just clear the drawings. Yeah. So from the brain, you see the spinal cord. This yellow thing is the spinal cord, and this bony structure that you see, that's your vertebral column. Okay. So as you see, the spinal cord is divided into 5 regions. Okay, depending upon where that region passes uh, from the neck till the backbone. Okay, from till here, as you see in this picture also. So from 1 to 3, as you see, these vertebral columns are numbered, basically 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes. So this section is known as the cervical region. So the nerves are accordingly named as C1 to C7. Then this region is the thoracic region, and you have 12 nerves in this section, 7 in the cervical, 12 in the thoracic, and that is how the naming is there. Cervical C1 to C7, thoracic from T1 to T12. Then following the thoracic region, the 4 nerves will fall under the lumbar region, that is the below the back. It will be named as L1 to L5. This is L1 to L5. And finally, this tail is known as the sacral and the coccyx. Okay, so S1 to S5. So the whole spinal cord is divided into 5 parts. The tip is known as the coccygeal. So several spinal nerves will emerge out of the spinal cord out of the each segment that we just saw. Yes, in this previous picture, if you see over here, so this is how the nerves will, this is the central spinal cord, and the nerves will emerge out of this, and accordingly it is named. Yes. Moving forward, so there are 8 pairs of cervical, 5 lumbar, 12 thoracic, 5 sacral, and the tip, that is the coccygeal, 1 pair of spinal nerves over there. Now pair means what? One will extend from the right side and the another to the left side, and that is how they are known as pairs. Okay. Yes. If you cut the spinal cord, the transverse section or the cross section of the spinal cord, it will look somewhat like this. Yes, circular structure. The black portion that you see over here, it is your cerebrospinal fluid, and the spinal cord and the vertebral column which is there. When you cut it, it will look like something like this. Okay. It is known as the root. The extensions are known as the root, and the middle portion that is running like a tube over here is known as the horn. Okay, so you have the back side and the front side and the side horn. So this the back side is known as the dorsal horn, and then you have the lateral horn like that. Okay, what are the main things that you need to know over here is the central canal over here. Okay, which is the where the spinal cord is there. Then you have the white matter where the non-myelinated ones are there. Sorry, the myelinated axons will concentrate over here, and the non-myelinated will constitute the gray matter. Okay, then this is the divider or the septum, you say, or the fissure, posterior one, the backside one, and the front side. Okay, in the center, median, that is why it is known as. Yeah, so these are the dorsal root and horn, and these are the ventral root and horn. And these black portions you see, these are the meninges. That is the fluid which will protect and support the function of the spinal cord. It will provide nutrition. It will act as a shock absorber. Similar functions that the cerebrospinal was doing in the brain. So same here in the spinal cord as well. Okay, so this is how the cross section of the spinal cord will look like. Okay. So the TS of the spinal cord shows the area of white matter and the gray matter. This is depending upon the presence of myelinated or non-myelinated neurons. The central canal will form the central portion, and this is the extended part of the fourth ventricle. Remember in the previous video when we were talking about the ventricles, there are these 1, 2, 3, 4 ventricles. We saw the lateral view also, front view also. Ventricles are nothing but the hollow cavities that are filled with the cerebrospinal fluid. So the same thing is extended and it forms the central canal. Okay, basically it is a connection between the brain and the spinal cord and the rest of the body. So it forms a connection between the central nervous system and the brain and facilitates the movements of the body. Okay, also one of the important function of the spinal cord is to give proper pressure, proper posture. Yes, it will give a proper balance, a proper structure, standing structure, sitting structure to the individual. So it will provide to maintain the structural support of the body, and it will play a very important role in the body flexes. Now we will be seeing the reflexes responses, which is the integral function of the spinal cord. Okay, so this much you need to know regarding certain internal structures of the spinal cord and overall understanding of the spinal cord. Okay, before we move on to the reflex action, there is a small portion in your textbook talking about the peripheral nervous system. Now, why this topic we are discussing right now? Because now we saw the spinal cord, and the spinal cord is giving out the nerves. There are branches of nerves that we just saw in this picture. Okay, the nerves will arise from here. The cranial nerves and the spinal nerves will come. Okay, so that accounts your peripheral nervous system. So cranial nerves will arise from the brain, and the nerves which will arise from the spinal cord, together they will form your peripheral nervous system. Okay, so the peripheral nervous system connects the central nervous system, that is the brain and the spinal cord, and the different parts of the body. So you have the central control organ, which is your brain and the spinal cord. Okay, now the central organ will have branches. These branches are will constitute the peripheral nervous system. So this will communicate the information from the different parts of the body to the brain and the spinal cord, and vice versa. Okay, so the peripheral nervous system connects the central nervous system, that is the brain and the spinal cord, to different parts of the body, which will obviously have receptors and effectors. This we will see in the next slides. Okay, so depending upon the connection of the central nervous system, majorly you have two types of nerves: the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. Okay, they have peripheral nerves also, and they contain sensory neurons and motor neurons also. We have discussed what are sensory neurons and motor neurons, but anyway, we will be discussing in detail in the next topic after this topic, that is a reflex action. Okay, so we begin with the cranial nerve first. Okay, understand what is peripheral nervous system. Peripheral nervous system is basically a nervous system, the system of nerves which will connect the parts of the organ to brain and spinal cord. So brain and spinal cord is a central one party, let's say, and organs are the another party. So the connection point between the two, the connection point between the two will be brought about by the peripheral nervous system. So what are those type of nerves? There are two main types of nerve, cranial and spinal, of which we will begin with cranial nerves. I hope this classification is clear in your mind. Okay, if not, please make a note of it and read the textbook, and then you can reach out to me. I will repeat myself again. We have discussed the brain and the spinal cord, the structure and the function of the brain and spinal cord. We have just finished with spinal cord. Nothing more you need to know regarding the spinal cord. Whatever we have covered in these two slides would be enough for you. Okay, you are not expected to learn the diagram of the spinal cord. Okay, nothing diagrammatic in this picture as such. Then TS of spinal cord, of course, you need to know the diagram. And then these information that we discuss, supplementary to whatever you will be reading from the textbook. Okay, so now the other organs and all your organs of your brain and the connection between the brain and the spinal cord will be brought about by the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral nervous system has two types of major nerves, the cranial and the spinal, of which you have a table. Okay, in your textbook, if you will see your textbook, you have this whole table which I have split it up into two tables, as you see in the slide. So this table talks about the cranial nerves, and there is a short table which talks about the spinal nerves. So that we will be seeing after discussing the cranial nerves. Okay, so there are 12 cranial nerves that leaves the brain. They will arise from the brain and they will leave the brain as part of the peripheral nervous system. And primary, what is their function? To serve the head and the neck. Head and the neck. So they will do work for what? The organs, the parts of the head and parts of the neck. So the information communication to and fro from the head and neck to the brain will be brought about by the cranial nerve. Okay, now what you need to focus in this table in your textbook also is you need to know the number. Okay, for you have 1 mark MCQ and one line which are asked from this table. So we will only focus only on the type, the number, the nerve, and the type and the function. Okay, origin and course of location we will not go into detail because that is not required at your level to actually learn and memorize everything. But if you just memorize it, that will be for your good only. However, we will just focus on the nerve, the number, the nerve, the type, and their function. Okay, you are free to learn the origin and course on the location also. And if you want to know extra about it, you can contact me and then we can have a separate live class for that. Okay, so I will just go through this. You have to know this table, okay, for exam point of view and for understanding of different function of these cranial nerves which arise and from the brain and serve the head and the neck. Okay, so number 1 is your olfactory, which is responsible for the smell. Yes, olfactory, whenever you hear the word olfactory, is for smell. Optic is for sight, because they are seeing and smelling. So they come under which type? Sensory type. Then you have number 3, which is oculomotor. Okay, this will control activities. So it will other than the opposite of sensory is motor. So what it is doing, some sort of movement or some sort of activity will be involved when we talk about the motor neurons. It will cause an effect. Okay, it will cause an effect on the particular organ that we are talking about. For example, control lens shape like dilation and constriction of the pupil. So that's a movement. Then movement of the inferior oblique and the rectus. Okay, so whenever movement is concerned, we categorize into motor type. Yes. Then number 4 is the trochlear. Basically, these are for your ears. When we do the ear in the coming videos, we will come across these nerves again. They are again motor, movement of the superior organ. Oblique, they are part of your ear. Okay, right now I will not be able to show this, but you can see it in your textbook. You can search on the internet. However, we will be seeing this when we talk about the ear structure in detail in coming videos. Number 5 is trigeminal, which is mixed. Mixed means what? It will have the function of sensory also, and it will have function of motor neuron also. So it will serve both the purpose. It will be sensory in nature also and doing activities also, like mastication and floor of the mouth. So chewing and swallowing of the mouth. Then it will also be responsible for the sense for face, skin, mouth, nose, eyes. Okay, the stimulus that will arise from face, skin, mouth, nose, eyes. Then number 6 is abducen neuron nerve, which is again motor, and it will provide movement of the lateral rectus. Okay, the next remaining one, the 7th one is your facial, which is mixed. It will help in muscles of the facial expression. So whatever facial expression you make, that is controlled by the facial nerves, which is mixed in nature, sensory as well as motor. And also sensory in nature, which sensory? Taste, anterior 2/3 of your tongue. So the front part of your tongue is having this facial nerves, okay, which will be responsible for taste. 7th one is vestibulocochlear, again related to hearing. Cochlear, we will be seeing this in detail in coming videos. They are sensory, that is hearing. Function is equilibrium and hearing. Then 9th is glossopharyngeal, again mixed, which will have sensory and motor activities. So for motor activity, the movement of the pharynx, the pharyngeal muscles for gagging, swallowing, salivation, and sensory, the remaining 1/3 of the portion will be having glossopharyngeal nerves. Okay. 10th one is the vagus nerve, which is again mixed in type. So motor and sensory for pharynx and larynx, and motor for heart also, motor and sensory for abdominal visceral also. Then the accessory nerve, which is again mixed, yes, which is proprioception in soft palate. Basically, proprioception is movement of the soft palate of the mouth, pharynx, movement of the pharynx, movement of the larynx, head, shoulders, and for motor activities, you have these structures, which is sternocleidomastoid and trapezoid, which is part of your sternum. Okay. Moving to the 12th nerve, hypoglossal, which is motor in nature, and it is responsible for movement of the tongue, the motor tongue. Okay, you need to know the number, the name, and the function majorly, and the type. That's it. With respect to your exam point of view, you need not go in much detail. Still, if you are interested, you can read through it to the textbook, and you can contact me for further discussion. Moving to the spinal nerves. So cranial nerves were 12 in nature, spinal are 31. We need not know each and every nerve and their function. We will do just the introduction, that is which is there in your textbook. You should just know the number 31 pairs of the spinal nerve, which will originate from your spinal cord, as you see over here. Okay. So they are mostly mixed, that is sensory and motor in neuron. They will provide two-way communication between the spinal cord and your upper and lower limbs, the hands and legs. Okay, basically the upper parts of the body and the lower parts. So your major movement organ is your hands and legs. So it will provide communication between your hands and legs, neck also, and your trunk. Okay. So that's all about the spinal nerves. So we saw the cranial nerves and we saw the spinal nerves, the function. Only this much is required for you to know regarding the spinal and the cranial nerves. Yes, we were talking about the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is the communication system between the central nervous system and different parts of the body. Central nervous system is what? Brain and spinal cord. The nerves that will arrive from the brain, that's the actual nerve which will act as the peripheral nervous system, which will serve as a means of communication between different parts and the brain. We just saw in the table, you have the all these different types of nerves that we just saw, optic, olfactory, oculomotor, trigeminal vagus, accessory, they have different actions. Cranial are mostly related to the head and the neck. And finally, the spinal cord, which will control all the other activities apart from the head and neck, the trunk, the neck, the upper limbs, lower limbs. Okay, so again, they will act as a communication medium between the brain and the different parts of the organ. And the nerves of the spinal cord will be mixed in nature. Okay, in cranial nerves, we saw some are mixed, some are sensory, some are motor, but spinal cord, all of them will be mixed in nature. Okay, now moving forward to the reflex action, which is the main function of the spinal cord. Okay, as you see in the representation over here, yes, you must be aware of the reflex action in brief from your 10th standard. You had this topic in your 10th standard also, but a bit in detail we will be discussing now. Okay, basically reflex is anything which is the response is generated quickly without the information being processed from your brain. So the brain will not be involved in this. Okay, the brain will not be involved in this. We'll just quickly see an example and then we'll begin discussing. So for example, there is a pin. You get a, uh, you touch the pin, for example, and the pin's tip uh, is poked inside your skin. So you feel some sensation. So as soon as the pin touches your skin, the sensory receptor in your skin will receive the information, will receive the stimulus. It will send it quickly to the sensory neuron of the spinal cord, and the spinal cord will then process or send the information in from through the motor neuron. That is, the motor neuron will have an effect on the muscle. So when you prick your finger with the pin, so what is your immediate response? What is your reflex action? Quickly, you will not sit and wait by the time your the information is processed by the brain and the brain tells you, oh, you have to pull your muscle back or you have to pull your finger back. No, it is a very quick and reflex action that is elicited by the spinal cord. So here the spinal cord is in major role. The brain does not participate in this information process, information delivery process. Okay, so immediately the pin is pricked on your finger. The circle that you see over here, from the sensory neuron to the motor neuron and quickly to the muscle, that is your hand, you will pull it back. Okay, so that is all what reflex action is. We are going to see all the terms in detail. So beginning with what is a receptor. So receptor will be, here we are talking about the skin. So it is any specialized cell or a group of nerve endings or an organ. It can be an organ also. You have nerve endings in your skin and your organs, which will respond to the signal. So here the signal was pin. Okay, it can be any hot substance or a very cold substance or any touch. Okay, so depending upon what is the information over there. Fine. So that will be the receptor. They will receive what information? They will receive stimulus from the surrounding. So now there will be neurons which will carry this information. So usually the stimulus that is received from the surrounding, the whatever you see, you hear, you smell, you feel, so they will be mostly carried by your sensory neuron. Another name for sensory neuron is afferent neuron also. Okay, so sensory neuron will do what? It will carry the information from the external environment. If you're talking about skin, so it will be external environment, or if there is any organ within the body or within your body, then it will be internal. Okay, so it will carry the information and it will direct it towards the brain or the spinal cord. So sensory neuron, we are not talking only with respect to reflex action over here. We're talking in general. It will carry information which it will conduct the impulse representing the information, either external or internal, to the brain or the spinal cord. In this case, it will be the spinal cord. Okay, then what will be the control center? Control center mean who will process the information, that what will be the action of the received information. Okay, so that will be your control center. That is the central nervous system, which will receive the information from the environment. It will process that information, and if appropriate and if required, it will generate, it will generate a response. It will generate a response. So it will generate motor command to the effector organ, which will be a response to the stimulus from the environment. Getting this? So basically the control center will process the information, and if required, what action needs to be sent out, what action needs to be carried out by the effector organ. So that will be given, returned, that generation of the command will be through the motor neurons. Understanding? Moving to the next part of the reflex action. I will just clear my, yeah. So we have understood what is sensory neuron. Now understanding what is the interneuron. What is interneuron? A link between the sensory and the motor neuron. So sensory will sense the information from external and internal stimulus, and it will be, the effect or the information will be finally given through this motor neuron, and in between the intermediate neuron, the middle neuron that will connect the sensory and the motor neuron will be the interneuron. So a nerve cell which will be found entirely within the central nervous system. Okay, that will act as a link between the sensory as well as the motor, which will help in integrating and communicating or transmitting the information between the different parts of the central nervous system. So interneuron will not be in connection to any sensory organs like skin, eyes, or something like ear, tongue, or any muscle, or any effector organ. It will be inside the central nervous system only, which will connect the sensory and the motor neurons for communicating, transmitting the information. Okay. Then finally, you have the motor neuron, which will do what? It will convey the information, the electrical impulse, away from the central nervous system, okay, to a muscle, away from the central nervous system to the muscle. Okay. Or it can be a gland also, or it can be a tissue also, that will regulate the activity of the effector. So the effect, whatever the information has been processed by the central nervous system, the brain or the spinal cord in this reflex action. So whatever information has processed, and the effect of it will be carried by the motor neuron. Okay. Moving forward. Moving forward with the next term, which is the effector. So effector, as we have also discussed time and again, it can be any muscle, muscle of the hands, muscle of the leg, muscle of the eye. Okay, it can be a gland, it can be any organ also, which is capable of, receiving the information and basically responding to the stimulus which was received. Okay, which has been, capable of responding to a stimulus which has been evaluated by the control center. The control center can be CNS or spinal cord, mediated by a nerve impulse or a hormonal signal. So effector should be capable of sensing the information and receiving the information and acting accordingly to the information processed by the control center. Okay, and coming from the served by the nerve. Yes. So effector is defined in this way. And finally, this forms the reflex arc. This whole thing starting from the receiving of the impulse to the sensory neuron, interneuron, and the control system. In this case, we are talking about the spinal cord. It can be spinal cord, or in general, it can be brain also, giving the processing it and giving it to the motor neuron, and motor neuron finally giving it to the effector muscle. Okay. So a reflex arc will define the pathway by which a reflex will travel from the stimulus to sensory neuron to motor neuron and to the muscle. Okay. Now, based on the type of the nerves which are involved, the cranial nerves or the spinal nerves, you can see the reflex action can be broadly classified into either cranial reflexes or spinal reflexes. Yes. So cranial reflexes, obviously, the nerves arising from the brain, okay, and the spinal carried through the spinal cord. So the nerve arising from the brain, and obviously they will be carried out of the by the brain only, and spinal ones which will be carried out through the spinal cord. When we are talking about a cranial reflexes, their action will be slow. So slow action response, whereas spinal nerves, they will show urgency for the response and it will be a quick action. Example, watering of the mouth on sight or smell of the good food. So this is the one of the example that will be under cranial reflex. Okay. Yes. So it takes some time on the sight or the smell of good food. The water slowly and steadily will start releasing saliva, so watering of the mouth. Whereas spinal, which gives you a quick response. So, for example, withdrawal of a leg while stepping on something hot or pointed. Okay. Now, based on the previous experiences, the reflex action can be unconditional or conditional. Means what? Unconditional, what will happen? They will do not require any previous experience. Okay, the reflex that you will experience, which will not require any memory from previous experience. Example, sneezing. So that's a immediate reflex response. Coughing, yawning, hiccuping. Okay, immediate reflex response which will not require any previous experience. So that is why it is known as unconditional. No previous condition is required for this to happen. Whereas conditional reflexes will be based on the previous experiences. For example, swimming, dancing, cycling. What will happen over here? For example, initially these actions are voluntary, but when learning is being done, after that perfection happens. Then they become what? Involuntary. Okay, then they become what? Involuntary. This is the example. This can be explained best by the study which was carried out by the scientist, which is known as who's known as E. Paulao, and it's a very famous experiment. You can search on the Google. You will be amazed by knowing it. Many of you might be aware. I think in school textbook there is mention of this example in science too. I think in 9th or 10th standard wherein Pavlov conducted an experiment on the salivation of the dog. So initially he used to ring the bell, bring the food, and then the dog used to eat. So slowly and steadily, every day this activity was carried out at the sight and sound of the bell. So then at the end, what he did was Paula used to only ring the bell but not bring the food. So automatically the dog started salivating. So that is how conditional reflexes act. Okay, how they function. Now, according to the number of synapses involved, it can be simple monosynaptic or complex polysynaptic. Monosynaptic means what? Only sensory and motor neurons. Example, knee-jerk reflex. Okay, only sensory and motor neurons are involved in simple monosynaptic reflex action. In complex one, it involves interneurons also, sensory interneurons and motor neurons, all of them. So complex polysynaptic, many synapses will be formed basically. Cycling, swimming. So you have the brain, you have your limbs, you have every part of your organ which should be communicated and coordinated in a well manner to carry out these activities like cycling, swimming, dancing, etc. Okay, so this is how there is broad classification of these reflexes. This is from your textbook, depending upon, see, the first one is depending upon the type of nerves, cranial or spinal, then depending, basically the control action, then depending upon the previous experiences and depending upon the number of synapses that are involved. Okay, so that's all for this video. In the next video, we will talk about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, and we will also see the different sensory receptors and its types. Thank you. Take care. We will begin parasympathetic and sympathetic in the next video.